We are recording. We can jump into the meeting now.
Well, I'm gonna take my mask off, because this is all we have. So.
Sure.
Peter, would you like me to introduce myself so the players know who I am and why I might be here?
Yes, yep, I figure we'll add that in a moment. I think we'll go.
Okay,
We'll do that as an adjustment to this agenda here.
perfect. Thank you.
Now, slide me one of the agendas there, would you? Pete?
Sure. We can just add that adjustment and then we'll have her and Steve both speak to that. We could.
Okay.
Go ahead. Start this as well.
Sure. Wondering if I should even move down.
I think you're all right.
Okay, all right.
I can hear you quite well.
Can you, all right, good. I noticed on the camera, I'm the remote guy at the end of the table, that's all, so.
I can see you well too.
Right. All right. Okay, session number 2, February 14th, 2022. And this is Wally Paul speaking. We had an email from Louis, or I had an email from Louis, and I know, I guess we all did, about whether or not we should be simplifying the language of the charter, and that kind of made sense to me. I guess I'd like to have Louis talk about that for a second.
Could I interject?
Oh, wait a second.
Before we get into that, can we do an adjustment to this agenda and have, I'd like to introduce Ms. Beth Suitlander to introduce herself and add some commentary on this process, given her professional career, and then I'll have, I know Steve has some research data on that as well that he'll add afterwards.
Okay,
Please.
Good, thank you. I know a few of you, I don't know all of you, and if you know me, you probably just know me from kicking around town or working with the high school performing arts, which Peter and I had a big laugh because I just knew him as a drummer in a Grateful Dead shirt. He had just knew me as the lady who knew where to find the Grateful Dead shirt. But when I moved to Millinocket, shortly before I retired, we moved to Millinocket full-time in 2008. And when I retired as the senior project manager for IBM. And for nearly 20 years, my responsibilities had been drafting and managing complex contracts between IBM and some of our Fortune 500 customers, specifically Ford, Boeing, Dassault. So I'm not an attorney. I don't pretend to be an attorney, but I know an awful lot about contracts. And I know an awful lot about reading statute. So last year, when a lot of the craziness started happening in town, and I found myself with a little bit more free time than perhaps I needed, I decided to read the charter and the code to figure out, how does this form of government work? Because it's not like a form of government that I had dealt with in the past. I know a lot about corporate law. I know a lot about HR. I do not know a lot about municipalities other than what I've read in Maine statute. I do know a fair bit about Maine not-for-profits, having been an executive director for one and written their charter and bylaws. So with that in mind, I had offered to work on this committee, but chaos pursues and we had a pandemic and things went by the wayside. But in the meantime, I did speak to Steve a little bit ago, and I spoke to Peter, and I have to, from my professional opinion, first of all, I'm going to say I'm here to help, and I will help you guys in any way I can. I offer my services to consult, to read, to counsel. I am not an attorney. And more importantly, I'm not a judge, and I think that's where we end up in our biggest kerfuddles. However, the order that formed this committee was to address the charter. The charter you can think of, in my view, as the Constitution of the United States. The code is the law, is this book of statutes. They are two distinct documents. And that was my initial reading. I've asked a couple other friends with better professional credentials than mine, and they agree. That doesn't say that a local judge would agree, but the charter and the code are two distinct documents that reference each other. If you look at the last page of the charter, it is very, very specific about what has to be done if you want to change anything in the charter. And this ain't it. And I pointed this out to Steve and Peter. Peter, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but if you look at the very last page, which is C34, it refers to a state statute that outlines what you need to do to change the charter, not the code. You can do whatever you want in the code. The charter itself needs to be done in a very specifically prescribed methodology. Charlie,
May I interrupt?
yeah,
I'm Charles Prey. I'm a counselor, obviously, a former state legislator. And the order to draft this review, this is a review of the charter, is
Yes.
not the intent of changing the charter, but to make recommendations of which the process that you're talking about would then kick in.
right. The difference is that the document that it refers to is very specific about who can even recommend changes and how they get implemented.
That is
So I'm
correct.
not saying that this group can't meet and can't come up with recommendations, but if your goal is to actually change the charter and to simplify and change the language in the charter, this is not a viable mechanism to get there. In my opinion. You guys can read this and take it the way you want. I'm all for going through this. The charter document is old. And it really prescribes and defines how much the town council can do. It's extremely limiting. Again, this is my reading of this document. It also is the reading of this document by two other people, but I'm not the judge that gets to rule. So that's my concern. I also have gone through and read much of I've read all of the charter and much of the code. And I've identified for your use, however you care to use it, areas where it conflicts, areas where it refers to state statutes that have been repealed or that have been modified, that you may or may not still want them, want to reference. But that's my concern, is that we have a committee that is set up to review and modify proposed modifications to the charter, which is not. Anyway, that's who I am, and that's why I'm here, and I will help any way I can. I'm not concerned with what it says. I'm concerned with how it says it and making sure that we have a document that is viable and will stand up in a court of law.
Thank you. And that's definitely a very valid concern, and bringing that to us is something that we should probably have taken a look at, especially now that we're recording these and it can make it more accessible to the public. Because this was definitely a topic of discussion early on as we were forming this committee. So going through this thought process again, I think is beneficial for everyone, not only on the committee, but also in the public as well. Just to let you know, our municipal lawyer, who has been our lawyer for quite some time, did shed some light on this. I'm just going to read to you quickly his reaction to this committee being formed and what we're looking to do here, followed by a couple other points. His thoughts are, please consider these two statutes, the state statutes that you're referring to,
Yep,
in the context of your committee, which has been reviewing the charter. Charter amendments, which is the first portion, can be initiated by the council, which according to section 2104.1, or by citizens following the petition procedure, which is also outlined in that same section. No matter how initiated, the amendment or amendments need to be voted on by the voters. A charter revision, which is another process, may also be initiated by the council or by citizens, but a revision requires a vote by the voters to establish a charter commission. So those are the two differences. A charter commission deals with revisions, which I think is probably on the scale of what you're referring to, in which there would have to be a 9-month process that's officiated a very specific way and then eventually be voted on by the voters.
okay, Steve, I'm sorry, there was a revision, what was his first
Amendment. So
amendment?
charter amendments can be initiated by the council or citizens. That's according to section 2104.1. And he further added, the existing committee is fine if it proposes one or more charter amendments that do not constitute a charter revision. So basically, the difference between amendment and revision is amendments deal with adding and subtracting existing charter sections, whereas a revision would be replacing charter sections. So as long as we fit to the nature of existing charter sections by adding, subtracting, basically clarifying is what we're looking to do, that does not constitute a revision. A revision would be taking out and replacing entire sections of the charter.
So his view is that you can do clarifying modifications, but not significant changes?
That is correct. That would constitute an amendment, and that would still ultimately have to be voted on by the public.
Okay,
And
That's
I do take your point, and I think your idea is in line with what a charter commission would basically outline, which is dealing with a revision.
right. I mean, that's, okay,
You know, we actually have sections that we will probably go over tonight, or we're scheduled to, that were amended by ordinance in 86 and one in 84 and 1984. The compensation and induction into office. Does that mean that those sections are illegal?
I don't know.
That would be, is it maybe detailed later on in the charter that those could be changed by code?
I don't recall seeing that, but I've just been trying to read ahead and look at what I thought we would cover meeting to meeting, so it would be fresh for me. But that
I
would
would-
be,
In my opinion, if we were starting with a blank piece of paper, the charter would be very skinny, and a lot of things would not be in there. Right now, my reading is the charter severely limits what the council can even pass ordinance on. Where the bounds of the authority are of the council. I hope I'm wrong. But I would be remiss in not bringing that up. What I have seen in here, and I don't have all of the history, the copy that I have of the documents has not been updated in almost 10 years. So there, I'm sure things that I'm significant changes that I am missing. I defer to Dean on his reading of it. It is a variation, and I want to go back and look at the state statute again. I don't have the entire thing printed out here in front of me, because I'm kind of between and betwixt places. But yeah, I don't know. You're muted, Lou.
Yeah, well, it's a.
I'm sorry, excuse me. The changes
changes.
that we're contemplating here in these amendments are, are basically updating what's in the charter that does not conform to the ordinances that have updated it. So there's sections in here that we've, like monetary remunerations for the counselors and stuff. The practice is not what's stated in the charter. So we're clarifying that by updating what it is, or
Right.
or amending it to read that it is allowed by change, not stating a specific amount or something like that. And the suggestion I had, like section C 204, where we're starting off on, the recommendation I made about reading this is a lot of long run-on sentences. And if you read that first one that we got kind of stuck on discussing at the last meeting, it says appoint and remove town manager and town clerk, should be a period there, because the next line addresses appointing some other parts of the some other positions. And so the suggestion I made was to have someone other than ourselves that could quickly go through this and somebody that has a composition, like a writing composition class student or something, and simplify the reading of this by shortening the sentences and not changing the meaning of anything. Then we could review that as, being amendments that we would make to the document.
And
I don't see us changing the structure at all of this thing, or the outline of it, as in what a revision would be.
Good.
We're not gonna eliminate anything.
Charlie,
Yeah, I need to drop off. I've got a call from the governor's office on some other issues.
yeah, the president called me too. It's a tough thing.
You want to address the Indian lands claim issue?
That
Come
was
on the
for
call.
Louis' sake, not for yours, sorry.
Thanks, Wally.
Lou, I
Louis,
absolutely,
I agree with what you're saying, and if we were sitting here writing new bylaws, say like for an organization, that would exactly be what we need, what I would like to see, make it a nice readable document.
right.
But having listened to Beth for a second and having read Dean's letter, you got to wonder down the line how much effort and how much money we actually want to put into making these kind of changes. I mean, sitting here talking about it is interesting for me, having been a counselor and just a citizen of Millinocket. It's kind of cool reading through it. It makes you think about things and understand things better. But in the end, I don't know how much I want to open my wallet to
I don't
make what are basically adjustments rather than to make.
Either way, we're going down that road that you're concerned about, Wally. Either way, what we do here is going to have to be voted on.
Well,
So-
I agree with you, Wally, that it's a can of worms that is getting opened up here, and it's as I described it to Steve, it's like it's a real tangled ball of spaghetti, and you can't pull on one piece without disrupting all of the rest of it. Unfortunately, it is so tangled up and there are so many conflicts that the document becomes of less value and more difficult to defend. as a charter and as a set of law, as a code, because of the number of conflicts and the number of limitations. I agree that, I mean, if you look at section 204, that's the section that I was referring to, that if I take that at face value, and even with all the commas and semicolons, that that section, letter C, if you read through that carefully, you guys, your hands are tied on so many topics, the way it is written. And there are things in the code that conflict with what's in the charter, but the charter is the ruling document. So you can change all the code you want, but the charter is still the trump card. That's,
Well, I
But
think
then
that's why we're looking to review the charter, is so that, this
It agrees with
becomes a
what we're doing.
document that we go off of.
the
I personally
problem
don't
is,
see it
Steve,
as a tangled spaghetti as you're mentioning. This has been in existence basically for as long as the town has been here without any major issues. Obviously, what inspired this was some recent events that, there are specific issues that I think a lot of members of the public, including myself, want to address.
and
but-
I want to say again, I'm not trying to be a troublemaker. And this is between us. I'm not taking this anywhere. But if I read this at face value, the way this document reads right now, the folks that are looking at short-term rental ordinances have no business doing that. It is prohibited by the charter. It's got to
Oh,
be
true,
4 rooms
true.
or more, or it's none of your business.
Yeah.
Well, I
That's what
think
the
that's the
charter
point
says.
I think that's the point of going through it. We're only on the second page.
Yeah,
So
but
So
the question,
Beth, can I ask you a question, Beth?
sure.
What would be wrong with the process of us going, what we're doing here, to bring this document in line with what we see as current practice by
Right.
ordinances that's already been passed?
Yep.
We get it all revised to look the way we want. And then we go to C-34 and we follow the process of setting up a commission, handing them our work, and going through the process to get it voted on. What would be wrong with doing that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, as long as the commission knows that they have clear reign to do what they see fit, independent of whatever document you give them.
Well, of course, it would be a recommendation, just
Right.
like committees. We're a
I think
committee.
I like it.
It's
I
a-
hadn't even
it's
thought
a-
about that, Gene. I think that's an excellent way to approach it. Because one of
Well, that's all we
the
are.
challenges is
As
that
a
you've got,
committee, We were always of the opinion that once we get this work done, it's a recommendation to the council. Now, if the council has to follow C-34 to get it enacted,
right,
that's what we'll do at that point in time.
right.
But let's just do this thing so that it makes sense to us, and then present it to whoever and go through all the steps that we have to
Right.
make it legal.
And I defer to Dean and whatever other legal counsel may be involved. Just be aware that going through this work does not necessarily result in anything being changed. And it doesn't change anything in the code.
It's exactly
Which
as you
is-
say. It's exactly as you say. We have a zoning ordinances that prohibits short-term rentals in our most restrictive residential area. And even that it goes against the written charter the way it is. And that's
Right.
why these are things, that's why
Right,
our revision would bring it, our reading of it would bring it in practice with what is going on, with the practice that's going on.
I
And
think
then,
we are of a like mind.
okay, well, good then. So let's just do this as a committee recommendation to the process of getting it accepted down the road. And like you say, the commission will go through our work and say, well, look, this is not right, that's not right, and it'll get further refined.
Is part of, and I had asked this prior, but don't know the answer. It may be lost in my mail somewhere. Is the scope of this group also, are you also going to attempt to reconcile where there are differences between the code and the charter?
Yeah, statements in the charter that is not in agreement with the zoning ordinance that's been passed through a referendum back in the 80s should
Right.
be updated in the charter. We update the charter to match
Right.
what we're doing, the practice that's going on. And that way we can have our charter and then to leave it general or objectively in some spaces so that the council can take further ordinances changes in the future, and they wouldn't be in disagreement with what's written in the charter like it's happened over time here.
Okay. Like I said,
And I'll
I mean,
I'll just note that we are a little over halfway through the meeting. I'll just reiterate Louis' point, because some of us have, actually about half of us have a meeting at 5.
Yeah, we do.
So it'd be good to get to these other items. But Beth, I think you expressed that you are of the same mind of what Louis suggested, which is we are simply looking at recommendations that we could either offer as amendments in the future following state statute or offer as revisions through the Charter Commission. So if you're good with leaving it there and we can get to these other agenda items, that would be appreciated.
I agree with reservation that I am of the mind that none of what you are doing at this point, do I believe, are things that the council can implement directly without an independent council as outlined in 2103.
We're willing to follow that, what's outlined there after we've done the work.
Well, from my time on the council, one of the things that there was a bedrock of the work that we did was when we asked citizens for advice in an advise and consent type of relationship. The idea is that we were looking for an education. We were having people explain things to us so that we could think better about them.
Right.
And if I'm hearing what Louis had to say, and this addresses a concern that I had having read Dean's letter. But if I'm hearing what Louis has to say, that's exactly what we're shooting for. We're gonna go through this. We're gonna read it as comprehensively as we can, make suggestions, large and small, make adjustments, make it everything on paper, and then present it to the council as advice. Say, here's what we got out of reading this. Why don't you read our advice, read our examples, and think about it, and think about what the next step is going to be, and get the advice of the town lawyer, get advice of the statutes, and find out. And here's why we think you should be looking at it.
Yeah, and going through that process, it's like any other committee, we're just making a recommendation. Then the lawyer will tell you what you have to do to go about to get it accepted. And if that means setting up a commission to review our work and bring it to the voters, then that's what we do.
I will defer to Dean, but I do not believe that was the intent of the law.
Dean did speak to this already, which is what I pointed out. And we have
Right.
the option of either doing amendments, which would be just through the council and then a public vote, or we could go through the Charter Commission process, which is much
I
more
agree with
extensive
that.
and also very expensive.
I'm going to leave it right where it is. Okay, I will
I
leave it
agree.
where it is. I will assist you in any way that I can in terms of formatting, documenting, identifying terms that are undefined. And I will leave it to the lawyers and the courts to figure out what you have to do. That's beyond the scope of my expertise.
If you help us create a simple, understandable, like common language, the way this reads, it confuses anybody by the time they get through the end of a paragraph.
The thing about
You know,
reading
if we-
contracts, you gotta be real careful between the semicolons, the commas, the colons, and the periods.
Yes, and this is where you could really contribute. Maybe you can do this.
They make
compositional-
a huge difference.
Maybe you can make this compositional change that we're looking for. Shorten sentences, not run-on sentences, so that when you don't have to get all confused about what the meaning of the whole thing is. Maybe you could take on
Amen.
the composition of this.
I
You know,
will
go
give you
through-
the time I can.
Okay.
Perfect. that being said, Wally, should we jump into,
C204?
C2, yeah, C204B, I think is where we are.
No,
And
I think we
Louis and others, if just to mention, Peter and Wally, you guys are awfully quiet just because you're further away from the mic. When other people's mics are not muted, it cuts you guys out, just mentioning. So
Oh,
if no one's talking, if you could just mute your mics so that we can hear Peter and Wally, that would be great.
Excellent.
Yeah, actually. you should
I thought
put that
we were on
email so my
A,
wife can hear it.
C204.
Just checking again. Try again.
I said, Steve, you should probably put that in an email so I can read it to my wife about needing to hear Wally more.
I'm not getting in the middle of that one.
No, good move, really. Trust me, neither am I. All right, if we could start, and it's on page C7, section B.
Had we resolved section A?
Yes, we had. We crossed out the word manner. In fact, I think you got a
Oh, yeah,
typed copy of
processes.
the revision that or a
Okay,
adjusted copy of the revisions I sent by email.
all right. Yeah,
And
okay.
just adding to that too, we were going to look into whether other towns also have their positions listed in their charter as well. And that was something we were going to reach out to MMA about eventually.
Section A, we changed manner to process. If you remember, we had quite a
Right,
talk about it.
okay. Right. So on simplifying the reading and then, like I say, putting a period at like appoint and remove town two positions versus only be able to appoint the following positions. You know, simplifying the reading of that paragraph like that. Do we want to act on having somebody do that kind of compositional change, like Beth could do it? You know, ahead of us or behind us, whatever. Because there's a lot of sentences here that run on into 2 or 3 thoughts rather than being succinct.
Lou, there's some very specific structure that the lawyers use, that this is consistent
and
with.
that's and this is what I'm looking to change. Legalese is not what we want the charter to read like. We want it to read like the common person can read and understand.
Judge Roberts agrees with you.
We do, Louis, but we also want it to be as comprehensive as we can have it.
You can have comprehensive in a bunch of short sentences versus a sentence that has, like, just for example, in A, you're talking about appoint and remove the town manager and the town clerk. Should be a period because that's what that is. Then it says appoint other positions. The difference being not appoint and remove. So why should there be a comma there?
Well, a semicolon is what's there in between clerk and appoint. And that basically serves as a period that also allows the same thought process to continue.
Well,
So
it's limiting.
it does separate.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, Louis, and I understand that. And just from the issue of readability, it makes perfect sense, but I want to make sure that we're not cutting some of the meat out of the sentences to make it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm asking.
You know,
That's what I'm asking. How does it change the meaning? If you put a period, start another short sentence saying something about the other
Well,
position.
if you put a period there, then it takes away the first line just under enumeration of powers, which is referring to the council having the power of. If you put a period there, you have to reiterate that before every single sentence. If you put a semicolon, it concludes that section of that long sentence and allows the previous sentence to continue. So it separates it perfectly while keeping that entire A under the first sentence of C204. So it does separate it,
I would think the colon in the first sentence would achieve that.
Now, if you put periods, you would have to reiterate the council over and over and over again. So for example, after clerk, you put period, it would say the council shall also have the power to appoint the Board of Assessment Review. And then again, after planning board, again, after all that.
If you wanted to, you could bulletize it. You could make it a list, a dot list. That
Well, there,
would
that
serve
would
the
be-
same function as the semicolon. The problem is your document is going to grow in length,
Yeah.
which is why, I mean, the semicolon's used to keep them concise.
Yeah, it would basically be A1, A2, A3, A4, A5 instead of just having A.
Right.
And
Or you could do just do bullet points, would have the same, you would still, well, it's just, you could space them, leave the semicolon, space them onto a separate line, which makes it more readable, but it makes the document much more cumbersome.
And I agree with that. In fact, I was just going to say that if you had bullet points, 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3, that would be a more modern reading, which is, I think, is kind of what you're shooting for. But
Exactly.
A, B, and C would be 4 pages long
Exactly.
to do that,
It's a really good
maybe
point.
3 pages long. And by the time we were done, it would be a huge document.
I think the way it's written is perfectly fine personally. It separates each section appropriately through a semicolon, which is essentially a period that allows the sentence to continue.
Alrighty then.
All right. Section B. Moving to section B.
Yeah,
I don't know how far we'll get. We're looking at about 15 minutes at this point.
yeah. Well, actually, when I read through it this afternoon and marked up stuff, other than my concern about the style of it, which I don't see a good way through, as we just discussed, I didn't see much that needed. Needed change, although I've been pleasantly.
You didn't see it, I didn't have.
I would be interested in, at some point, especially if we're gonna have a lawyer look through this and go through a process, either amending or revising. I think it would be beneficial to have which is often common in all sorts of documents, a definitions list of some of these items in here. In other words,
Amen.
yep. In other words, when it refers to an office. So we have halfway through B, we refer to the charter. The council by ordinance may assign additional functions or duties to offices, departments, or agencies established by this charter, but may not discontinue or assign to any other office, department, or agency any function or duty assigned by this charter. In other words, I think it would just be very helpful to define what an office, what a department, and an agency are. Otherwise, it could be widely interpreted, even though it may be simple to some who've been in municipal government for a while. I think to Louis' point and others, being able to defer to that would be very helpful in this process.
Yeah, I totally agree, Steve. I started a list, I don't have it in front of me, of all of the terms that I think should be defined. For those of you that don't do contracts much, you can use a term and capitalize it. and then define it somewhere else. So the term town, for example, should be defined somewhere because it's used very loosely and it's used all kinds of different ways. The chief administrator versus the town manager get used interchangeably and the same and different, and those terms should all be defined. And I agree, Steve.
It's a really good point.
Perhaps as we read through this, we can circle some of the terms that we see or write it down on a separate sheet and kind of keep track of that. I'd be happy to take that on. If we read through it and there's a term that someone suggests we define, I can circle it and write it down.
Now, just because we're having an open discussion and I want to play devil's advocate, I think there may have been a reason that those weren't defined and why some of the things are as vague as they are, so that they can be as inclusive as they can be. If you say, what was it, office department or agency, I think that design is to say anything that you have in your town. Because if somebody else comes along with a different name for it, now you might have a problem in court or something, you know?
Yeah, I see that point. We could also define it loosely. Because if we're looking to consistently change things, especially if we are going to be making changes, let's say halfway through the document that uses one of those terms that's not defined, that could conflict with how it was used previously. So maybe, the way that we're going through this, if we have the same understanding as we're making changes, we'll be sure to change it with the right terminology.
Yeah, that's a good point. If our glossary of terms were to somehow define departments as any function within the city government somehow, so it's all inclusive.
Right.
Then you can lose office and agency from your discussion. If you write it in your glossary that it includes any term that might include those. Then your glossary helps you shorten up your text and make it more readable.
Good point.
So I'd be happy to circle these if everyone is fine with that as we go.
Yeah, take a stab at
this.
that. That would be helpful.
Yes.
All right. And on that note, just looking at C, although it's very obvious to us what an ordinance is, per Beth's point, that O should be capitalized. And we should make it very clear that anytime ordinance is used, we're referring to the town ordinances. It's just a very, very simple thing.
Yeah.
Boy, that's circular.
So what are we looking at right now?
See,
Thank you.
Is there anything in
So that
this
whole
section
list-
that's not included? That we need?
that
to
whole
add?
list of, yeah,
It's quite an
that whole
extensive
list of activities.
To play devil's advocate, I would say that this list is the list I would use if I were trying to do something in town and you didn't want me to. I'd say, well, it's not there, so you can't control it. It's a
You
very,
see it as limiting it.
I
see
think, I see it as
inclu-
extremely
Trying to be
limited.
inclusive.
I see it as extremely limiting. I mean, where would you put, where would you put the pot stores in this list?
I think all that needs to be done here is just including but not limited to.
Exactly.
And I think Peter's trying to
Exactly.
say something. It's hard for us to hear because our speakers are all not muted. Peter, did you have something?
I just said medical cannabis dispensaries. Trying to keep the terminology on point there.
That can go on our definitions list.
Sure. I just meant in reference to the comment on pot stores.
No, I know.
Sure.
We can, if we just do including but not limited to, if everyone's good with that, I think that would be more than expansive enough.
I agree.
I like that suggestion.
I agree that it is, but I think that is a huge change in the charter.
It would still classify
Well-
as an amendment.
But actually, Beth, practice now is under ordinances that we pass. And
Right.
if it's happening, shouldn't we change this document to match it?
I absolutely agree that this should be changed to not limited to. I just,
Where would you
it's a
put that?
very big change to the Constitution.
Mhm.
That's all.
Well,
Wally, to
think
answer-
I think the
Wally
intent
asked
when
a
this was
question.
written, to be all inclusive.
Yeah, Wally, to answer your question, where I was suggesting it would be, let's see, 4th sentence from the bottom, where it says town council may establish and make provisions for by ordinance to wit. I would change to wit, including but not limited to.
But not limited to, okay.
Yep.
Instead of to wit. To wit would be eliminated, correct?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Okay.
Is there anything else in that section anyone sees?
Well, I was thinking, doing something with the, lodging houses, maybe adding some of the current temporary short-term rental type uses.
Yeah, I was thinking of just
Being
taking
used.
out everything after lodging houses, so just lodging houses, not defining it
There
by
you go.
room size.
There you go.
I noticed that one of the items in section C was dealers and secondhand merchandise. We have like 4 dealers in secondhand merchandise at least.
In terms of thrift stores and,
Yeah,
yep.
St. Martin's and the Armory,
IKEA Ministries, yep.
and up on the hill there,
Peter Peter.
Gracie's.
Oh, Gracie's, yep. Yeah, that's a good.
On the lodging houses, as for a second, it would be good to keep consistent the terminology that's also in the code. I don't think it refers to it as lodging houses. So I'm going to circle that as being something for us to define and put that note next to it, just to make sure that it's consistent and it can be encompassed.
Now, Steve, in your original suggestion to eliminate after lodging houses, are you including in that thought lodging rooms or more?
Yeah,
So-
I was having everything deleted after lodging houses. So lodging houses and then just going straight to public shooting galleries.
Okay.
Perhaps just curiosity, but why is this articulated this way?
The lodging houses.
What, I mean, circuses, dance halls, fireworks. It just seems like never mind. It's just a very
Sounds like-
strange and random list.
Sounds like the uses that were in practice at the time.
Yeah,
It sounds to me like they went down they were thinking as they went down the road, what do we have next? What do we have next? What do we have next?
actually,
Is there any thought on, condensing that list into, something nodding to entertainment, forms of entertainment?
Oh, we got public wagons.
Well, I mean, fireworks, dance halls,
Sorry.
circuses, could be.
there are old pictures in Millinocket of carnivals and circuses on Main Street.
Just noting it is 5 o'clock.
Now,
Yeah. My question is, what is the intent of the section? How broad do you want the powers of the council to be and how narrow? This narrows them, it defines them, but confines them into that specific space. And as you go forward, think about what you want that scope of power to be. That's all.
Thank you,
I
Sam,
got-
for sharing your comment in here. She added complicated. Thank you, everyone, for your work to update the charter. That being said, it has struck 5 o'clock and a
Yeah.
portion of this group has to jump to our next meeting with sustainability.
sure. And actually, although we didn't get a lot done on working on the actual charter, I really appreciated the conversation that we had tonight. I had some concerns that were vague to me on what we were doing and if we should be doing it and everything. I feel a lot better now. And I think that with our next meeting, we can get rolling better. Beth, if I had your email address, I'd put you on with the group and then you'd get reminders and information that goes out.
And Beth, if you award me the permission, I can share that with him easily. You're muted. Yes.
Okay, all right, great.
Wonderful.
Okay, so Pete will send me that and you guys have a meeting at 5. Our next meeting will be the 23rd at 4 o'clock. And I'll send a reminder out on the 16th about it.
Okay.
Excellent.
Wally, if you let me know what your email is and I can share with you what I have. And
Okay,
I'll let you get on to the next meeting.
Pete will send me that right away and I will I'll send an email to you and then you can email me back. How about that?
It's a deal.
Okay?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Hey,
you.
I'm happy.
Wally,
Thanks a lot,
Wally.
guys.
Hey, Wally, you've already
Yeah.
got a message out there giving the next meeting is the 28th from Diana with the link.
Say that again, Louis?
There's already a message out there with the next meeting being the 28th.
Is there?
Yeah,
Oh,
Check your
oh,
Outlook.
geez, yeah, sorry, it is, I was looking at, I made myself a calendar, you can't see it, but it's got the whole year, I was looking at May. Yes, it is the 28th, it is the 28th, Louis, thank you.
We'll take,
Okay.
yeah, Louis, I'll see you when I jump to the next link.
yeah, we'll see you there, bud.
Okay, I'm gonna